The ambush. The dense jungle of Karkan 7 was alive with the hum of alien life, the thick underbrush concealing dangers at every turn. Captain Alina Morrow moved silently through the foliage, her every step calculated to avoid detection. Her team had been deployed to this distant planet on a reconnaissance mission, but something had gone wrong. The initial reports indicated minimal resistance, yet now they found themselves hunted. Alina's pulse quickened as she caught a flicker of movement in the distance. Her instincts told her it was no mere animal. She signaled to her team with a swift hand gesture, ordering them to spread out and maintain radio silence. They had trained for situations like this, where every second could mean the difference between life and death. The air was thick with tension, each soldier's breath controlled and measured, waiting for the inevitable. Suddenly, the jungle erupted in a cacophony of sound. Alien war cries filled the air, and in an instant, the squad was under attack. Beams of energy cut through the trees, searing through the leaves and splintering the wood. Alina dove behind a large rock, her rifle at the ready, scanning for the source of the attack. The enemy was swift and coordinated, their movements almost too quick to track. "Hold your positions," Alina barked into her comms, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Her team responded with precision, returning fire with a disciplined ferocity that spoke of their years of training. Yet for every enemy they downed, two more seemed to take their place. Through the smoke and the din of battle, Alina finally caught a glimpse of their attackers. They were insectoid creatures, with exoskeletons that shimmered in the dim light, their multiple limbs moving with an unnerving fluidity. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, and they wielded energy weapons that fired in rapid bursts. Alina felt a chill run down her spine. These were not the mindless drones they had been led to believe inhabited this planet. These creatures were hunters, and they had prepared for this encounter. But what they hadn't anticipated was the sheer determination of their human prey. Alina's thoughts raced as she took in the situation. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but retreat was not an option. Her team was counting on her to lead them through this. With a deep breath, she formulated a plan. "Team, listen up," she said, her voice firm. "We're going to push forward to the extraction point. We need to move fast and keep them on the defensive. Stay close and watch each other's backs. On my mark, go." The squad moved as one, a well-oiled machine of coordinated action. They advanced through the jungle with a controlled fury, firing in calculated bursts that forced the aliens to pull back. Alina led the charge, her sharp eyes spotting the smallest details, the subtlest movements in the undergrowth that betrayed their enemies' positions. The battle raged on, the alien hunters relentless in their pursuit, but for all their cunning and ferocity, they had underestimated the tenacity of the humans. Alina's team fought with a resolve that bordered on the superhuman, their every action driven by a primal instinct for survival. As they neared the extraction point, the alien attacks grew more desperate. It was clear they had not expected the humans to last this long, let alone push them back. Alina could see the fear creeping into their movements, the hesitation in their attacks. They were beginning to realize the truth. These humans were not just another prey to be hunted. They were a force to be reckoned with. In a final, coordinated assault, Alina's team broke through the last line of alien resistance. The extraction point was just ahead, and as they reached it, the dropship descended from the sky, its doors sliding open to offer them a way out of this hellish jungle. But as Alina turned to give the order to board, she saw one of the aliens break from cover, charging toward them with reckless abandon. It was larger than the others, its exoskeleton a deep, iridescent blue, and its eyes burning with a savage intensity. In its hands, it clutched a weapon unlike any she had seen before, a crackling lance of energy that could likely cut through their armor with ease. Time seemed to slow as Alina raised her rifle, her sights locked on the charging alien. She could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of the choice before her. There was no time for second-guessing, no room for error. She pulled the trigger. The shot was true, striking the alien square in the chest. The creature stumbled, its momentum carrying it forward even as it fell. It hit the ground mere feet from Alina, its weapon skidding across the dirt. The predator becomes the prey. The dropship ascended swiftly, leaving the chaotic battlefield below. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, but the soldiers' faces showed a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. Alina sat silently, her eyes locked on the retreating jungle through the viewport. The events of the past hour played over in her mind, every decision, every action scrutinized for what she could have done differently. The alien leader's dying gaze haunted her, a mixture of shock, anger, and perhaps something more profound. It wasn't just another combatant. It was intelligent, calculating, and perhaps even honorable in its own twisted way. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. "Captain," Lieutenant Foster's voice pulled her back to the present. "We're approaching the carrier. ETA is 5 minutes. Alina nodded, pushing her thoughts aside. "Good. Let's get debriefed and figure out what the hell just happened down there." As the dropship docked with the orbital carrier, the team filed out, the metallic clang of their boots echoing in the hangar. They were met by Commander Briggs, a no-nonsense officer with a grizzled appearance that spoke of decades of warfare. "Captain Morrow," Briggs began, his tone clipped, "we've received some troubling intel. Follow me." Alina fell into step beside him, her mind racing. Briggs was not one to exaggerate. If he said the intel was troubling, it was likely catastrophic. They entered the command center, a room buzzing with activity as officers monitored various feeds from across the sector. A large holographic map dominated the center of the room, displaying the surrounding star systems in detail. Alina recognized the Traxxas region, where their mission had taken place, now highlighted with numerous red blips. "Those are the enemy," Briggs said, gesturing to the map. "The Zilar, the species you encountered on Tarkan 7. Alina's heart sank as she realized the extent of the threat. The red blips weren't just on Tarkan 7. They were spread across multiple planets, each one representing a potential stronghold or hunting ground. They'd been expanding rapidly, Briggs continued. "We initially believed they were a minor threat, more of a nuisance than anything else. But after your encounter, it's clear we underestimated them. They're organized, well-armed, and they're spreading faster than we anticipated." Alina studied the map, her mind piecing together the implications. "They're not just hunters," she said quietly. "They're preparing for something bigger." Briggs nodded grimly. "That's our assessment as well. We believe they're gearing up for a large-scale offensive. We need to find out what they're planning and stop it before it's too late." Alina's thoughts returned to the alien leader she had killed. The determination in its eyes, the way it had charged at them, despite overwhelming odds. It wasn't just fighting for sport. It had a purpose. "What's our next move?" she asked, her voice steady. "We need more intel," Briggs replied. "There's a Zilar outpost on the moon of Varthex. It's a small facility, but it's heavily guarded. We need your team to infiltrate, gather whatever information you can, and get out. If we can learn more about their plans, we might be able to stop them before they launch a full-scale attack." Alina nodded, already mentally preparing for the mission. "When do we leave?" "Immediately," Briggs said. "The longer we wait, the less time we have to react. This might be our only chance to get ahead of them." As Alina turned to leave, Briggs placed a hand on her shoulder. "And Captain, be careful. This enemy is unlike anything we've faced before. They're smart, and they're relentless. Don't underestimate them." Alina met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I won't, sir." The team regrouped in the armory, each soldier checking their gear with a practiced efficiency. Despite the urgency of the mission, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. They had barely escaped with their lives on Tarkan 7, and now they were heading straight into another potential death trap. "Everyone ready?" Alina asked, her voice cutting through the silence. A chorus of affirmatives followed, though the underlying anxiety was palpable. They were soldiers, trained for this kind of operation, but the encounter with the Zilar had shaken them all. Elena took a deep breath, pushing her own doubts aside. We've faced worse, and come out on top. The Zelar think they're the hunters, but they're about to find out what it's like to be prey. Stay sharp, watch each other's backs, and we'll get through this. The dropship's engines roared to life as it detached from the carrier, speeding toward the moon of Varthex. The surface was a barren wasteland, dotted with jagged rocks and craters. The Zilar outpost was hidden beneath the surface, shielded from detection by the surrounding terrain. As the dropship descended, Elena's focus narrowed. The adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her senses. This mission was critical. Failure was not an option. The ship touched down silently on the moon's surface, its stealth systems engaged. The team disembarked swiftly, moving with the practiced stealth of seasoned operators. Elena led the way, her rifle at the ready, as they approached the entrance to the outpost. A pair of Zilar guards stood watch, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Elena raised her hand, signaling her team to halt. With a series of precise hand gestures, she gave the order to take out the guards quietly. Two of her soldiers moved into position, their suppressed weapons barely making a sound as they fired. The guards dropped silently to the ground, their bodies hidden behind the rocks. Elena moved forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The entrance to the outpost loomed ahead, a dark, foreboding tunnel that seemed to lead straight into the heart of the moon. This was it, the moment of truth. With a final deep breath, Elena led her team into the darkness, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them within. Into the heart of darkness. The tunnel was pitch black, the only light coming from the small tactical beams mounted on the team's helmets. The walls were rough and uneven, clearly carved out by something other than human hands. Elena could feel the tension in the air, every step taken with the utmost caution. "Stay close," she whispered into her comm. "We don't know what's waiting for us in here." The team moved in a tight formation, their weapons at the ready. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of their equipment and the occasional drip of water echoing through the tunnel. Elena's heart raced as they descended deeper into the moon, the oppressive darkness closing in around them. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up into a vast underground chamber. The team paused at the entrance, their lights sweeping across the space. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with an eerie green light. In the center of the chamber stood a large structure, clearly the heart of the Zilar outpost. Intel said the main control room should be in there, Elena said, nodding toward the structure. "Let's move." They advanced cautiously, every sense on high alert. The chamber was unsettlingly quiet, too quiet for a facility that should have been bustling with activity. Elena's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but they had come too far to turn back now. As they reached the entrance to the structure, the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit corridor beyond. The team moved inside, the walls closing in around them as they made their way deeper into the facility. Elena's pulse quickened with each step, the oppressive atmosphere making it hard to breathe. She could feel the weight of the mission bearing down on her. Failure here could mean the destruction of everything they had fought to protect. They reached a junction in the corridor, and Elena held up a hand, signaling the team to stop. She listened intently, her ears straining for any sound that might indicate movement. The silence was unnerving, but it was the sudden surge of adrenaline that caught her off guard. "Movement ahead," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the comms. The team tensed, weapons raised as they scanned the corridor. For a moment, there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the underground complex. Then, without warning, a door to their left burst open, and a group of Zilar warriors charged out, their weapons blazing. "Ambush!" Elena shouted, diving for cover as plasma bolts sizzled through the air around her. The corridor erupted into chaos as the two sides exchanged fire. The Zilar were fast, their movements almost too quick for the eye to follow, but the human soldiers were well trained, their tactics honed by years of combat. Elena ducked behind a support pillar, her rifle returning fire with deadly precision. She took down 2 of the Zillar, their bodies collapsing in a spray of green blood, but more kept coming. It was clear that the Zillar had anticipated their arrival and were prepared for a fight. "Hold the line," Elena ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "We can't let them push us back." Her team responded with fierce determination, their training and discipline keeping them focused even as the odds seemed to shift against them. The Zillar warriors were relentless, their insectoid forms darting in and out of cover with a speed that was difficult to counter. But humans had one advantage that the Zillar lacked: adaptability. Elena's team adjusted their tactics on the fly, using the narrow corridor to their advantage. Grenades were tossed, creating a temporary barrier of shrapnel and fire that bought them precious seconds to regroup. The team pressed on, their determination unshaken despite the toll the battle had taken. They moved through the corridor, stepping over the bodies of their fallen enemies, until they reached a large door at the end. "This has to be it," Elena said, panting as she keyed in the override code on the door's control panel. "Get ready." The door slid open with a low rumble, revealing a vast, dimly lit chamber beyond. At the center of the room was a large, glowing console surrounded by alien technology that hummed with a sinister energy. The room was eerily quiet, but Elena could sense the danger lurking within. "This is it," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. The control room. The team moved cautiously into the chamber, spreading out to cover all angles. Elena approached the console, her eyes scanning the alien symbols that pulsed with a dull green light. She didn't understand the language, but she could tell this was the heart of the Zillar's operation. "Get to work," she ordered, motioning for the team's tech specialist, Sergeant Hawkins, to take over. Hawkins moved to the console, his fingers flying over the interface as he tried to hack into the system. The rest of the team formed a defensive perimeter, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "We don't have much time," Hawkins said, his voice tense as he worked. "I'm picking up signals. More Zillar are on their way. This place is about to get very hot." Elena clenched her jaw, her grip tightening on her rifle. "Do what you can. We'll hold them off." As Hawkins worked, the room's ambient hum grew louder, the alien technology responding to the unauthorized access. The walls began to vibrate slightly, and Elena could feel the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. Whatever they were tapping into, it was powerful, too powerful to be just a local command post. "We're not just dealing with a local operation here," Hawkins said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and dread. "This is a central node, an entire network of Zillar outposts across the sector. If we can take this down, we might cripple their entire war effort." Elena's heart skipped a beat at the revelation. This was bigger than she had anticipated, but it also meant they had a chance to deliver a crippling blow to the enemy. "Then let's make sure we do it right," she said, her voice steely with resolve. "How long?" "Just a few more seconds," Hawkins replied, his hands moving frantically over the controls. But as the seconds ticked by, the chamber's energy intensified, and the shadows around them seemed to move. Elena's instincts screamed at her to get out, but they were so close, she couldn't leave now. Suddenly, the chamber's doors slammed shut with a deafening crash, sealing them inside. The room plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the console and the eerie green glow of the alien symbols. "Captain, we've got incoming," one of her soldiers shouted, panic creeping into his voice. The Zillar had regrouped, and they were closing in fast. "Defensive positions," Elena ordered, her voice cutting through the fear. "We hold this room, no matter what." The team formed a tight circle around the console, their weapons aimed at the shadows. The air was thick with tension, every nerve on edge as they waited for the inevitable assault. But the attack didn't come from the shadows, it came from within. The console's glow intensified, and the symbols on the walls began to pulse in time with an ominous rhythm. Elena's heart raced as she realized what was happening. "They're trying to overload the system," Hawkins shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. If they succeed, this whole place is going to blow. Alina's mind raced, searching for a solution. They were trapped, surrounded by an enemy they couldn't see, with only seconds before everything went up in flames. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, she refused to give up. The last stand. The chamber's vibrations grew more intense as the seconds ticked by, the alien symbols on the walls flashing rapidly as the Zillar attempted to trigger a catastrophic overload. The air was thick with tension. Every breath labored as Alina and her team braced for what felt like an inevitable end. "We're not going down like this," Alina muttered, her voice steely with determination. She glanced at Hawkins, who was furiously working at the console, his fingers moving with blinding speed. "How much longer?" "Almost there," Hawkins shouted back, sweat dripping down his brow. "I'm bypassing the overload protocols, but it's going to be close." Alina's mind raced as she assessed their situation. The Zillar were closing in, their forces regrouping outside the chamber. They had no escape route, no reinforcements, and only moments before the entire facility might go up in flames. But surrender was not an option. This was their last stand. "Team, listen up," she called out, her voice cutting through the din. "We hold this room, no matter what. We've come too far to back down now. This is our fight, and we're going to win it." The team responded with a chorus of affirmatives, their resolve as strong as steel. They had fought alongside Alina through countless battles, and they knew she would lead them through this one as well. The chamber's vibrations became more violent, the symbols on the walls now a blur of green light. The Zillar were relentless, throwing everything they had at the human team in a desperate bid to wipe them out. But Alina and her soldiers stood firm, their weapons trained on the shadows that loomed ominously at the edges of the room. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the chamber as a section of the ceiling gave way, sending debris crashing down. The Zillar took advantage of the chaos, charging into the room with a ferocity that shook even the most battle-hardened soldiers. "Here they come," Alina shouted, her rifle blazing as the first wave of Zillar warriors rushed toward them. The team responded in kind, their weapons lighting up the dark chamber as they unleashed a barrage of firepower on the advancing enemy. The Zillar were fast, their movements almost a blur as they darted in and out of the shadows. But the human soldiers held their ground, their training and experience turning the narrow chamber into a death trap for the alien invaders. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as she fired shot after shot, each one finding its mark with deadly precision. The Zillar were fierce, but they had underestimated the humans' resolve. This was more than just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the future of their species. As the Zillar continued to press the attack, Alina noticed something strange. The symbols on the walls, which had been flashing erratically, began to sync up with the rhythm of the battle. It was as if the chamber itself was reacting to the conflict, feeding off the energy of the fight. "Hawkins, what's happening?" she shouted, her eyes flicking to the tech specialist who was still hunched over the console. "I'm not sure," Hawkins yelled back, his voice trained with effort. "But whatever it is, it's linked to the Zillar. The more they fight, the stronger it gets." Alina's mind raced as she processed this new information. The chamber was more than just a control room. It was some kind of power source, feeding off the Zillar's aggression. If they didn't stop the aliens, the entire facility could be destroyed, taking them all with it. "We need to disrupt the connection," Alina shouted. "Hawkins, can you reverse the feedback? Use their own energy against them." "I can try," Hawkins replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "But it's going to take everything we've got." "Do it," Alina ordered, her voice filled with determination. "We're not leaving here until this is over." As Hawkins worked, the rest of the team continued to hold the line, their weapons cutting down wave after wave of Zillar warriors. The air was thick with the smell of plasma and burning metal, the chamber shaking with the force of the battle. Alina fought with a ferocity she had never known, her every move precise and lethal. She knew they were fighting against impossible odds, But she refused to give in to despair. This was their moment. One final stand to turn the tide of the war. Suddenly, the chamber's vibrations reached a fever pitch, the symbols on the walls flashing so brightly that it was almost blinding. Hawkins let out a triumphant shout, his hands still working frantically at the console. "I've got it," he yelled, reversing the feedback loop now. The chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light as the energy within it was redirected. The Zilar warriors froze in place, their bodies convulsing as the power they had been feeding was turned against them. One by one, they began to collapse, their forms disintegrating into nothingness as the chamber drained them of their life force. Alina watched in awe as the tide of the battle shifted in an instant. The Zilar were being obliterated by their own power, their aggression turned into a weapon that consumed them whole. It was over in moments, the once imposing alien warriors reduced to nothing more than ashes. The chamber fell silent, the symbols on the walls dimming as the energy within it dissipated. Alina lowered her rifle, her heart pounding in her chest as she took in the scene around her. They had won. Against all odds, they had turned the tide of the battle. "Hawkins, status report," she said, her voice hoarse from the fight. "The overload is contained," Hawkins replied, his voice filled with exhaustion. "The feedback loop worked. We've neutralized the Zilar's power source. But this place is still unstable. We need to get out of here. Fast." Alina nodded, her mind already racing to figure out their next move. They had accomplished their mission, but the facility was still a ticking time bomb. They needed to evacuate before it was too late. "Everyone, fall back," she ordered, her voice carrying over the comms. "We're getting out of here now." The team moved quickly, gathering their gear as they made their way back through the corridor. The chamber behind them continued to pulse with a faint, ominous glow, but the danger had passed. The Zilar had been defeated. As they emerged from the tunnel and back into the open air, Alina took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the crisp, cold air of the moon's surface. They had survived, against all odds, and delivered a crippling blow to the enemy. But the war was far from over. The Zilar would regroup, and there would be more battles to come. But for now, they had won a decisive victory, one that would echo across the stars and remind the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. Alina looked up at the dark sky, her thoughts already turning to the next mission. This fight was just the beginning, and she knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous. But she also knew that they would face whatever came their way with the same determination and resolve that had carried them through this battle. They were humanity's last line of defense, and they would not falter. "Let's go home," Alina said, her voice soft but filled with determination. The team moved out, their footsteps echoing across the barren landscape as they made their way back to their ship. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The gathering storm. The ship's engines hummed softly as Alina and her team made their way back to Earth, the victory on the moon of Traxus still fresh in their minds. But the sense of triumph was tempered by the knowledge that their battle was just one skirmish in a much larger war. The Zilar were far from defeated, and their next move was already on the horizon. As the ship broke through the atmosphere and descended toward the military base, Alina's thoughts were consumed by the growing threat. The Zilar had been relentless in their pursuit of humanity, and their tactics were becoming more desperate and more dangerous. The battle on Traxus had shown that the aliens were willing to sacrifice everything to wipe out the human race. Once the ship landed, Alina and her team disembarked, greeted by the sight of General Rourke waiting for them on the tarmac. The general's weathered face was as stern as ever, but there was a flicker of relief in his eyes as he watched them approach. "Good to see you all in one piece," Rourke said, his voice gravelly from years of command. "You did a hell of a job out there." "Thank you, sir," Alina replied, standing at attention. "But we're not done yet. The Zilar are planning something big. I can feel it." Rourke nodded, his expression grim. "You're right. We've intercepted intelligence that suggests the Zilar are preparing for a massive offensive. They're rallying their forces across multiple systems, and it looks like they're aiming to strike at the heart of our defenses. Alina felt a chill run down her spine. The Zillar had always been a formidable enemy, but this was different. If they were planning a coordinated assault, it could mean the end of humanity's resistance. "What's the plan, General?" Alina asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "We're calling in all available forces," Rourke said. "Every ship, every soldier. We're going to hit them before they hit us. But we need to move fast. Time is not on our side." Alina nodded, her mind already racing with the possibilities. The upcoming battle would be unlike any they had faced before, and they would need to be at their best to survive. "We'll be ready," she said, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes, we'll stop them." Rourke's eyes hardened with resolve. "I know you will, Captain, and I'm counting on you to lead the charge. We can't afford to lose this fight." Alina felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The lives of countless people depended on their success, and failure was not an option. But she also knew that her team was strong, and together, they could overcome any challenge. As they moved into the base, Alina could feel the tension in the air. Soldiers were preparing for battle, their faces set with determination. The entire facility was a hive of activity, with troops and equipment being readied for deployment. Alina and her team quickly got to work, reviewing tactical data and strategizing for the upcoming offensive. The Zillar were a cunning enemy, but they had learned from their encounters, and they were ready to face them head-on. Hours passed as they prepared, the anticipation building with each passing moment. Alina could feel the storm gathering on the horizon, a sense of impending conflict that hung over them like a dark cloud. Finally, the call came. The Zillar fleet had been spotted, massing near a distant star system. They were on the move, and there was no time to waste. "Everyone, to your stations," Alina ordered, her voice carrying through the comms. "This is it. We're taking the fight to them." The base sprang into action, ships lifting off from the tarmac and soaring into the sky. Alina's team boarded their own vessel, the familiar hum of the engines filling the air as they prepared for launch. As the ship ascended into space, Alina took a moment to steady herself. The battle ahead would be the most challenging they had ever faced, but she knew they had what it took to win. The ship joined the rest of the fleet, a massive armada of human vessels ready to take on the Zillar threat. Alina could see the vast expanse of space before them, the stars glittering like distant beacons. "Captain," Hawkins said, his voice breaking through her thoughts, "we're picking up the Zillar fleet on long-range scanners. They're heading straight for us." Alina nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Set course to intercept. We're going to meet them head-on." The ship's engines roared as they accelerated toward the enemy fleet, the rest of the armada following close behind. Alina's eyes were fixed on the view screen, where the Zillar ships appeared as tiny specks in the distance, growing larger by the second. As they closed the distance, Alina could feel the tension building within her. This was it, the moment of truth. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and there was no turning back. "Prepare for battle," she ordered, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "And remember, we're fighting for everyone back home. We can't let them down." The ship's weapon systems powered up, the hum of energy filling the air as they prepared for the fight. Alina's team moved into position, their faces set with determination as they readied themselves for the conflict ahead. The Zillar fleet loomed before them, a vast armada of alien ships that filled the view screen. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that was relentless in its pursuit of victory. But Alina refused to let fear take hold. They had come too far, fought too hard, to give up now. This was their moment, and they would seize it with everything they had. "Engage the enemy," Alina ordered, her voice firm. "Let's show them what humanity is made of." The battle erupted in a blinding flash of light as the two fleets clashed, the void of space filled with the thunderous roar of weapons fire. Alina's ship rocked as it dodged incoming fire, the crew working in perfect sync as they returned fire with deadly precision. The Zilar were fierce, their ships cutting through the human fleet with terrifying speed. But Alina's team fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their every move calculated to inflict maximum damage on the enemy. As the battle raged on, Alina could feel the tide beginning to turn. The human fleet was holding its own, pushing back against the Zilar onslaught with a tenacity that surprised even her. They were winning, but the cost was high. Ships were being lost, lives were being sacrificed in the name of victory. But there was no other choice. This was a fight for survival, and they would do whatever it took to ensure humanity's future. As the battle reached its peak, Alina's eyes narrowed as she spotted the Zilar flagship, the command vessel that controlled the entire fleet. If they could take it out, they could cripple the enemy forces and turn the tide of the war. "Target the flagship," she ordered, her voice filled with resolve. "We're taking them down." The ship's weapons locked onto the Zilar flagship, its massive form looming in the view screen. Alina could feel her heart racing as they prepared to fire, knowing that this was their one shot at victory. "Fire," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. The ship's weapons unleashed a torrent of energy, the beams slicing through the void of space and striking the Zilar flagship with devastating force. The alien vessel shuddered under the impact, its shields buckling as the human ship poured everything it had into the attack. For a moment, it seemed as though the flagship would hold, its formidable defenses shrugging off the assault. But then, with a deafening explosion, the Zilar command vessel detonated in a brilliant flash of light, sending shockwaves rippling through the battlefield. The Zilar fleet faltered, their ships thrown into disarray as their command structure was obliterated. Alina watched with bated breath as the human fleet seized the opportunity, pressing the attack and driving the enemy forces back. They had done it. The Zilar were in retreat, their once mighty fleet shattered by the human assault. The battle was won, but Alina knew that the war was far from over. As the last of the Zilar ships fled into the darkness of space, Alina allowed herself a moment of relief. They had achieved a decisive victory, one that would echo across the stars and give humanity the hope it so desperately needed. But as she looked out at the wreckage of the battlefield, her heart heavy with the loss of so many lives, she knew that the fight was far from over. The Zilar would regroup, and there would be more battles to come. For now, though, they had won, and that was enough. "Let's head home," Alina said softly, her voice filled with exhaustion. The ship turned and began its journey back to Earth, the stars stretching out before them like a promise of the battles yet to come. The price of victory. The journey back to Earth was quiet, the crew somber as they processed the events of the battle. Despite the victory, the cost had been high. Ships were lost, lives sacrificed, and the scars of the conflict weighed heavily on everyone. Alina sat in the command chair, her gaze distant as she stared out at the stars. The exhilaration of the battle had faded, replaced by a deep weariness that settled in her bones. She had led her team to victory, but the price they paid was steep. The faces of those lost haunted her, a reminder of the fragility of life in the unforgiving expanse of space. The silence was broken by the soft chime of the comm system. Hawkins, ever vigilant at his station, looked up and said, "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's General Rourke." Alina straightened in her chair, pushing aside her exhaustion. "Put him through." The screen flickered to life, and the familiar face of General Rourke appeared, his expression one of stern concern. "Captain Varga, it's good to see you. I received the battle reports. Congratulations on a hard-fought victory." "Thank you, sir," Alina replied, her voice steady. "But it wasn't without losses. We lost good people out there." Rourke's eyes softened, a rare display of emotion. "War always comes with a price, Alina, and the Zilar are a formidable enemy. But you and your team have struck a critical blow against them. You've given humanity a fighting chance." Alina nodded, though the weight of those words did little to ease the burden she felt. "What's our next move, General?" The Zilar are in disarray, but they won't stay that way for long. Intelligence suggests they're regrouping in a nearby system, likely planning a counterattack. We need to press our advantage and keep the pressure on them. Alina's heart sank. There was no time to rest, no time to mourn. The war demanded everything from them, and it would continue to do so until it was over. I understand, she said, her voice firm despite the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm her. We'll be ready. Rourke's gaze held hers for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the burden they both carried. Get some rest, Captain. You've earned it. We'll brief you on the next mission once you're back on Earth. The screen went dark, and Alina leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Rest seemed like a distant luxury, something she could scarcely afford. But she knew Rourke was right. She needed to be at her best for what was to come. The ship continued its journey home, the stars outside a blur of light as they sped through space. The crew busied themselves with repairs and maintenance, a necessary distraction from the memories of the battle. But the weight of loss hung over them, a reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of survival. Hours later, the ship finally entered Earth's orbit, the blue-green planet a welcome sight after the darkness of space. As they descended toward the surface, Alina couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Earth was their home, their sanctuary in a galaxy filled with danger. But it was also a reminder of what they were fighting for. The ship touched down at the military base, and Alina disembarked with her team. The familiar sights and sounds of the base greeted them, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The war was far from over, and everyone knew it. Alina made her way to the command center, where General Rourke was waiting. He greeted her with a nod, his expression as stern as ever. Captain, I won't keep you long. I know you and your team need rest, but I wanted to discuss our next steps. Alina stood at attention, her exhaustion momentarily pushed aside. We're ready, sir. Rourke gestured to a large holo-display in the center of the room, which showed a star map of the surrounding systems. Our intelligence indicates that the Zilar are regrouping here, in the Serpentis system. It's a heavily fortified area, but if we can strike at their command center, we could deal a decisive blow. Alina studied the map, her mind already working through the logistics of the mission. The Serpentis system was known for its treacherous asteroid fields and high levels of radiation, an ideal location for the Zilar to regroup without detection. It's going to be a tough mission, Rourke continued, but I have no doubt that you and your team are up to the task. We'll be coordinating with other fleets, but your ship will lead the assault. Alina nodded, her resolve hardening. We'll get it done, General. Rourke's gaze softened, a rare moment of empathy. Take care of yourself, Captain. We can't afford to lose you. Alina allowed herself a small, tired smile. I'll do my best, sir. With the briefing concluded, Alina made her way back to her quarters, the weight of the mission pressing down on her. The Serpentis system would be their most dangerous assignment yet, and the stakes were higher than ever. But she knew that they had no choice. They had to keep fighting, for the sake of humanity. As she entered her quarters, the exhaustion finally caught up with her. She sank onto the bed, her body aching with fatigue. The faces of those they had lost flashed through her mind, a constant reminder of the cost of victory. But even as she lay there, sleep eluding her, Alina knew that she couldn't give up. The Zilar were relentless, but so was she. They had taken so much from her, from all of them, and she was determined to make sure it wasn't in vain. The battle ahead would be the toughest they had ever faced, but Alina was ready. She had to be. Because in this war, there was no room for weakness, only strength, determination, and the will to survive. As she finally drifted off to sleep, the last thought that crossed her mind was a simple one. They would win. No matter the cost, they would win. The final stand. The air in the command center was thick with tension as Alina and her team prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. The Serpentis system loomed ahead, a treacherous expanse of asteroid fields and radiation storms. The Zillar had chosen this system as their stronghold, and the stakes had never been higher. Elena stood at the helm of her ship, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. She knew that this mission could very well be their last, but there was no room for doubt. The fate of humanity depended on their success. Status report, Elena commanded, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her. Hawkins, ever vigilant at his station, responded quickly. All systems are operational, Captain. The fleet is in position, and we're ready to move on your command. Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on the holo display that showed the layout of the Serpentis system. The Zillar's command center was deep within the asteroid field, heavily fortified, and nearly impossible to reach undetected. But they had no choice. They had to strike at the heart of the enemy. Commence the approach, Elena ordered, and keep a close eye on those asteroid fields. We can't afford any mistakes. The ship moved forward, the rest of the fleet following closely behind. As they entered the Serpentis system, the ambient radiation levels spiked, and the asteroids loomed large, casting ominous shadows across the darkness of space. Radiation levels are increasing, warned Dr. Jace, monitoring the ship's systems from the medbay. We need to move quickly, or we risk exposing the crew to dangerous levels. Elena tightened her grip on the armrests of her chair. Understood. Hawkins, plot the fastest route to the command center, and avoid the densest clusters of asteroids. The ship weaved through the field, the crew working with practiced precision. Despite the danger, there was a sense of determination among them, a shared understanding that this was their final stand. As they neared the center of the system, the first signs of the Zillar defenses came into view. Massive automated turrets were positioned on the larger asteroids, their weapons systems scanning for any sign of intruders. Enemy defenses ahead, Hawkins reported. We're picking up multiple weapon signatures. They're ready for us. Elena's mind raced, calculating their options. A direct assault would be suicide. They needed to outmaneuver the Zillar and strike where they least expected it. Prepare the decoys, she ordered. We'll use them to draw their fire and create an opening. The crew sprang into action, launching a series of drone decoys that sped toward the Zillar defenses. As expected, the automated turrets opened fire, their attention diverted away from the main fleet. Now, Elena commanded, full speed ahead. The ship surged forward, racing past the distracted defenses. The rest of the fleet followed, weaving through the asteroids with expert precision. The Zillar's turrets continued to fire at the decoys, unaware of the real threat closing in on their command center. But as they neared their target, the Zillar finally realized their mistake. Alarms blared across the fleet as enemy ships emerged from behind the asteroids, their sleek forms cutting through space with deadly intent. "We've got incoming," Hawkins shouted, his hands flying over the controls. Multiple Zillar fighters, closing fast. Evasive maneuvers, Elena ordered, her heart pounding. Engage all defensive systems. The ship swerved and rolled as it dodged the incoming fire, its shields flaring with each near miss. The Zillar fighters were relentless, their weapons cutting through space with deadly precision. But the humans fought back with equal ferocity. The fleet's weapons lit up the darkness, beams of energy and railgun projectiles streaking toward the enemy. Ships on both sides exploded in brilliant flashes, the debris scattering across the battlefield. Elena's focus was razor-sharp, her mind racing as she directed her crew. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But they had something the Zillar didn't: determination born of desperation. "We need to get closer to that command center," Elena said, her voice filled with urgency. "It's the only way to end this." "Agreed," Hawkins replied, his voice tense. "But those fighters are going to be on us the whole way." Elena's mind raced, searching for a solution. Then an idea struck her. "Hawkins, can we use the radiation from the system to our advantage?" Hawkins's eyes widened as he caught on. "You mean using the radiation storms to disrupt their sensors? It's risky, but it could work." "Do it," Elena ordered. "Take us into the heart of the storm." The ship veered off course, heading straight for a dense pocket of radiation. The Ziller fighters pursued, their weapons blazing. But as they entered the storm, the radiation began to interfere with their targeting systems. The once precise strikes became wild, missing their mark as the sensors struggled to lock on. Elena's ship, equipped with specially shielded systems, weathered the storm better than the Zillar. They emerged from the radiation pocket with minimal damage, while their pursuers were left disoriented and vulnerable. "Now's our chance," Elena shouted. "All weapons, focus fire on their command center." The fleet unleashed a barrage of firepower, the combined might of their weapons converging on the Zillar's stronghold. The asteroid housing the command center shook as the impacts hit, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. But the Zillar weren't finished yet. Desperate to defend their stronghold, they launched everything they had: missiles, energy beams, and swarms of fighters. The battlefield erupted into chaos as both sides fought with everything they had. Elena's ship took hit after hit, the shields buckling under the onslaught. But she refused to back down. "We're almost there. Keep firing." Finally, a direct hit from one of their railguns struck the core of the Zillar command center. The asteroid trembled before it erupted in a massive explosion, the shockwave rippling through the system. For a moment, everything went still. Then, the Zillar forces began to retreat, their command structure in shambles. The once mighty fleet that had threatened humanity was now in disarray, their defeat all but certain. Elena sagged back in her chair, the adrenaline slowly fading as the realization of their victory sank in. They had done it. They had won. But as the fleet regrouped and the remaining Zillar ships were mopped up, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this victory, too, had come at a great cost. The faces of those lost in the battle haunted her, a reminder that the price of survival was often paid in blood. The war was far from over, but for now, humanity had bought itself time. Time to rebuild, to regroup, and to prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. As the ship set course for Earth, Elena allowed herself a moment of peace. They had won this battle, but the war for humanity's survival was far from over, and she would be ready for whatever came next.